Now, Zwolle is an important city, lots of canals and bridges. I want to know how these Nazis plan to defend it.
A man with one eye and a spine broken in 3 places walked into a German-occupied city of 50,000 people, alone, at midnight, and by sunrise the Germans were gone. No army followed him in, no tanks, no artillery, just Léo Major, a rifle, and a plan that started with a dead friend. His name meant nothing to most historians for decades. The Canadian army barely knew what to do with him either. He turned down a medal because he thought the general handing it out was incompetent. He escaped a hospital to rejoin his unit. He fought 2 wars with half his vision and came home from both of them, a legend nobody outside Quebec had heard of. This is the story of the man Dutch veterans still call the One-Eyed Ghost. Normandy. Léo Major landed at Juno Beach on June 6, 1944. 23 years old, a French-Canadian scout with the Régiment de la Chaudière. He had joined the army 4 years earlier, looking for 2 things: a fight against fascism and an adventure his hometown couldn't offer him. Normandy gave him both, almost immediately. Within his first days ashore, he tracked down and captured a German armored vehicle by himself, a preview of a habit that would define his entire war. A few days later, on a reconnaissance patrol, Major and 4 other soldiers ran into 5 German soldiers from an SS armored division. The fight was short and vicious. One of the German soldiers, mortally wounded, threw a phosphorus grenade before he went down. It burned Major's face and destroyed the vision in his left eye. A medic told him the war was over. Major disagreed. He refused evacuation to England, refused the discharge that came standard with a wound like that, and told his commanding officer something that would follow him for the rest of his life. He only needed one eye to aim a rifle. Consider what that refusal actually meant in practice. Depth perception depends on 2 working eyes: judging distance at night, tracking a moving target, reading terrain through a scope. All of it gets harder with half the normal input. Most armies in 1944 would have sent a man in his condition home without a second thought, and most soldiers would have gone gladly. Major stayed, and stayed as a scout specifically, the one job in an infantry regiment that depends most on exactly the kind of vision he no longer fully had. He stayed in the field. The nickname came soon after. The Germans who survived contact with him started calling him the One-Eyed Devil. His own men called him the One-Eyed Ghost. Both names stuck, and both were meant, at least in part, as a kind of warning. Word of the injury and the refusal spread through the regiment faster than any official report could have. Soldiers talk. A one-eyed corporal turning down a medical discharge to keep scouting became one of those stories units tell about themselves. The kind that sets a tone for what's considered normal in a unit that has decided its own standards run higher than the Army's paperwork suggests. The Scheldt. By the fall of 1944, the war had moved into the Netherlands. The Battle of the Scheldt was grinding through Zeeland, a campaign built around one goal: clear the waterways so Allied supply ships could finally reach Antwerp. It was slow, wet, exhausting fighting, the kind that rarely produces a single hero because there's rarely a single moment. The ground was flooded in places. The polders turned to mud, and units advanced measured in hundreds of yards rather than miles. Casualties came from artillery and small, grinding firefights rather than any single dramatic clash. Major found one anyway. He and a friend, Corporal Wilfred Arsenault, were sent out to find a group of soldiers who hadn't returned from an earlier patrol. Partway through the mission, Arsenault fell ill, and Major kept going without him. What he found was a barracks full of sleeping German troops and a commanding officer he could reach before anyone woke up. He pulled the officer out, marched him to the barracks, and let the sight of his own captured commander do most of the negotiating. 93 German soldiers surrendered, without a shot fired. Major radioed his own unit and asked, almost casually, if they could send tank support to help him walk his prisoners home. 93 men is not a small number to move on foot with no backup. It's roughly the size of a full company. A single soldier, walking prisoners of that size back through contested ground, has to manage the psychology of the situation as much as the logistics of it. Enough of the German soldiers had to believe resistance was pointless and had to keep believing it for the length of the march, or the numbers alone would have turned against him in seconds. That his radio call for tank support sounded almost like an afterthought says something about how in control of the situation he felt. It wasn't bravado. It was a man reporting a job that was, from his perspective, already finished. His superiors recommended him for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, an honor sitting one rank below the Victoria Cross. Major turned it down. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery would have been the one presenting it, and Major considered him responsible for the failed operation at Arnhem and, by extension, for the deaths of thousands of Dutch civilians during the brutal hunger winter that followed. In his own words, years later, Montgomery had made an awful mistake. I didn't like him at all. He called Montgomery incompetent to his face, in effect by refusing the medal in his name. It was an extraordinary thing for a corporal to do. Medals in that era weren't just personal recognition, they were currency, the kind of thing that shaped careers and pensions and how a man's service would be remembered by his own government. Major set that currency aside over a matter of principle involving a decision made months earlier by a commander he'd likely never met in person. It likely cost him any future promotion. He stayed a corporal for the rest of the war and never seemed to mind. The landmine, February 1945, nearly ended him for good. Major was helping load bodies into a Bren gun carrier after a firefight when the vehicle struck a landmine. Everyone else inside was killed instantly. Major survived, but the blast broke his back in 3 places, broke both ankles, and cracked 4 ribs. Medics rushing him to the field hospital had to stop every 15 minutes along the way just to give him more morphine. Doctors told him the war was finished for him this time. There was no arguing with a broken spine. He argued anyway. A week after being admitted, Major discharged himself from the hospital and disappeared. He spent nearly a month recovering in secret with a Dutch family near Nijmegen, technically absent without leave, technically in violation of every rule the army had. When he finally reported back to the Régiment de la Chaudière's scout and sniper platoon in March 1945, no one disciplined him. There didn't seem to be much point. He came back with a back that had barely healed, ankles still fragile, and one working eye. The war had 1 month left to run in Europe, and Major was determined to spend it on his feet. It's worth sitting with the physical reality of that decision for a moment. A spine broken in 3 places doesn't heal in a month, not fully, not in a field hospital or a farmhouse without proper equipment. Modern recovery from an injury like that runs into many months, sometimes longer, with surgery, physical therapy, and careful monitoring the whole way through. Major had none of that. He had a Dutch family willing to hide an AWOL soldier, whatever painkillers they could find, and his own stubbornness. He walked back into his unit still in pain, still fragile, and asked to be put back on scouting duty, rather than something safer behind the lines. No officer forced that choice on him. He made it himself, twice in one war, first with the eye and now with the spine. And both times the choice ran the same direction. Stay in it. Zwolle. On April 12, 1945, the Chaudière Regiment reached the outskirts of Zwolle, a city of roughly 50,000 people still held by a mixed force of German Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops. Estimates of the garrison's size vary widely across accounts, ranging from a few hundred defenders to over 1,500. Whatever the true number, it was a defended city, and the plan for taking it was the plan armies had used for centuries. Soften it with artillery, then move in. The regiment's commanding officer needed eyes on the German positions before the guns opened up the next morning. He asked for volunteers. Major stepped forward. So did Arsenault. They left at 9:30 p.m. on April 13, moving through the dark toward the edge of the city. A stop at a farmhouse gave them a break they hadn't expected. A Dutch family living there had watched the German defences for weeks and knew roughly where the gun positions were. Major and Arsenault took the information and kept moving. Around midnight, near the railroad tracks ringing the city, a German machine gunner opened fire from a hidden position. Arsenault was killed instantly. There was no time to process it. Major charged straight into the gunfire, closed the distance, and killed the crew with his Sten gun. He could have turned back. He had lost his partner, he had a body to report, and the mission on paper was reconnaissance, not conquest. Instead, Major decided to keep going, alone, into a city he had no way of knowing the size or strength of, with one working eye and a back that had been broken 2 months earlier. What happened over the next several hours has the shape of a myth, except that it's documented. Major moved from position to position across Zwolle, hitting German strongpoints one at a time, firing from different angles each time to make it sound like an entire company was advancing, rather than one furious man. He set fire to the SS headquarters. He captured prisoners in small groups, and after each capture sent them ahead under instruction to spread the word that the Canadians were already inside the city, in force. He wasn't just fighting. He was performing a fight, and the performance was convincing enough that German command started making decisions based on it. Positions that could have held for hours were abandoned instead. Officers who might have organized a counterattack pulled their men out, rather than risk being surrounded by a force they couldn't see and couldn't size up. Think about the information available to the German defenders in that moment. They heard gunfire from the north, then minutes later from somewhere south, then east. Reports of prisoners taken, of a headquarters burning, of Canadians already moving through streets they thought were still theirs. No radio call from any German position could confirm the actual size of the attacking force, because there was no way to see it clearly in the dark, and every scrap of evidence available pointed toward a full assault already underway. Command decisions in war are made on the information available, not the information that turns out to be true. And Major had made sure the available information said far more than it should have. There's also a quieter detail in most accounts of that night that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Each group of prisoners Major released carried word of what was happening back into the city, spreading uncertainty through word of mouth even faster than gunfire could carry it. He wasn't just clearing positions one at a time. He was seeding doubt through the exact channel that would move it fastest, the mouths of the very men who'd just seen him alone and armed. By the early hours of April 14, the German garrison had withdrawn from Zwolle entirely. When the Chaudière regiment advanced that morning, expecting a fight, they walked into a city that had already liberated itself, or, more precisely, had been liberated hours earlier by one man who was supposed to be scouting. Léo Major had gone into Zwolle with a partner and a mission to gather information. He came out having emptied a city of 50,000 people of its German garrison without a single Canadian casualty in the assault itself. This time, when the Distinguished Conduct Medal came, he accepted it. Montgomery wasn't the one handing this one out. What the city remembers, Zwolle never forgot. To this day, the city holds ceremonies honoring Major, and streets and memorials carry his name. Dutch families who lived through that night passed the story down the way families do with the events that mattered most to them, not as a footnote in a larger campaign, but as the specific night their city didn't burn. For a Canadian soldier who spent most of his career as an uncelebrated corporal, it's an unusual kind of legacy, more durable in the Netherlands than it was, for decades, in his own country. That gap between Dutch memory and Canadian memory says something about how military history gets written. The regiments and the generals who plan large operations tend to keep the historical record. A single corporal running an unauthorized one-man assault, however successful, doesn't fit neatly into an official after-action report the way a battalion-level advance does. Zwolle's own residence ended up doing the work that official Canadian military history was slower to do, keeping Major's name alive at the street level long before it reached wider recognition back home. Major's war didn't end with Zwolle, and neither did his willingness to volunteer for things other men would have called impossible. He went on to serve in the Korean War, where he was wounded again and again refused evacuation. He became the only Canadian soldier in history to receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal in 2 separate wars, a distinction that still stands alone in Canadian military history. 2 wars, 2 medals, 2 separate refusals of the safe option available to him. By that point, the pattern wasn't an accident. It was simply who he was. He died in 2008, largely unknown to the broader Canadian public he had fought for twice. It took years, articles, documentaries, and a slow accumulation of attention from military historians for his story to travel the distance from Zwolle's town square to the rest of the world. Even now, his name draws blank looks in parts of the country he served, while in Zwolle, schoolchildren learn it as a matter of course. The math of one man. Strip away the myth-making language, and what's left is still almost impossible to believe using the numbers alone. 93 prisoners taken alone at the Scheldt, a spine broken in 3 places, 4 ribs cracked, both ankles fractured, and a return to combat duty within weeks. A city of 50,000 people, defended by a garrison that outnumbered him by hundreds, if not over 1,000 to 1, cleared in a single night by a corporal, moving from position to position and firing from as many angles as he could manage before dawn. None of it required him to be uninjured, well-rested, or even fully sighted. It required him to keep moving after the moment most soldiers would have stopped, the moment his partner was shot beside him and the mission technically ended. Major's entire war record is really one long answer to a question nobody asked him. What happens if you simply don't stop? He said it himself, plainly, without much interest in making it sound heroic. He fought the war with only one eye, and he did pretty good. Somewhere in Zwolle, there are still people alive who would tell you that's the most understated line in the history of the war, delivered by the man who single-handedly proved it true. There's a temptation, telling a story like this, to reach for the language of superheroes, to treat Major as some kind of exception to the rules that govern ordinary human limits. That framing misses the actual lesson sitting inside his record. He wasn't immune to injury. The eye was gone for good. The spine took months to properly heal, even after he'd forced himself back into service. He felt pain the same way anyone would. What separated him wasn't a different body, it was a different answer to the question every soldier eventually faces, the one about how much is enough before it's reasonable to stop. Zwolle's streets still carry his name because a city remembers, better than almost anyone, exactly what it cost to keep it standing. 50,000 people went to sleep under German occupation on the night of April 13, 1945, and woke up free. And the entire difference between those 2 nights was one man who refused to turn back after losing his friend at the railroad tracks. That's not a story that needs embellishment. The numbers alone carry it.